of Los Angeles. I also want to add that environmental regulations are not topping the list of problems that small districts in my community are saying. Last week, I met with over 50 small businesses, and they said they need more access to capital, not less regulations. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady's time's expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentlelady from California may view this argument about jobs as a false choice, but we do have letters from over 300 organizations concerned about the impact on jobs that these EPA regulations will have, including letters of support from 5 of the largest labor unions in the country. The gentlelady's amendment would basically say that in the 10 metropolitan areas chosen by the American Lung Association, that the current boiler rules would be retained regardless of what our legislation may do. So we are opposed to our amendment for 2 reasons. One, we don't want the legislation to be changed because we think it's necessary to have the balanced approach throughout the country, and not to exclude 10 metropolitan areas. But the second reason we would be opposed to it is that to allow one private entity, even if it's the American Lung Association, an organization we all have respect for, but we don't think that they should be determining what should be in this legislation. And so for that reason, I would respectfully oppose the amendment and ask that the amendment be defeated and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For purposes does the gentleman rise? Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I support this amendment, and I want to congratulate the gentlelady from California for offering this amendment. Her constituents should be rightfully proud of the fact that she's fighting for them and for the good health of the American people. Her amendment recognizes the fact that we made great progress on air pollution in this country because we've had a strong Clean Air Act and because we've let EPA do its job under both Democratic and Republican administrations. But let's not pretend that the job is done. In the 10 worst polluted areas, these are the worst polluted non-attainment areas in the country, every day people are breathing unhealthy levels of air pollution, and they're going to emergency rooms because of the air outside is making them sick, and every day some are dying before their time. In the summer cities and towns across the country have red alerts, and moms are afraid to let their kids play outside. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. Despite the progress we've made, we need to make sure that we cut these air pollutants that are very, very harmful. We've been talking a lot today about mercury, but the EPA boiler rules would reduce emissions of fine particle pollution, which can lodge deep in the lungs and cause serious health effects. Living in the United States should not be a health risk, and I hope that we will not vote to nullify these EPA boiler rules and also nullify the health benefits in these very polluted areas. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a roll call.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. For purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mrs. Capps of California.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, it's my hope that we can all simply agree to this amendment. It would simply add a finding to the bill illustrating the health benefits of EPA's mercury and air toxics cleanup standards for industrial boilers and incinerators. Opponents of these cleanup standards argue that they cost too much and will lead to job losses. I don't agree with that assessment. Over the past 40 years, the Clean Air Act has fueled American innovation, and it's created jobs. And it's made the United States a leader in the multi-billion-dollar environmental technology sector. Mr. Chairman, the health benefits of EPA safeguards are not in dispute, and that's why those facts should be included as part of this bill. For decades, industrial boilers and incinerators have been some of the largest pollution emitters in the United States. They're responsible for some of the most dangerous air pollutants we have in this nation, including mercury, lead, and cancer-causing dioxins. And that's why EPA took action last year to require that industrial boilers and incinerators cut their emissions and simply follow the Clean Air Act. But instead of supporting EPA's action, the bill before us would delay their standards by at least 3.5 more years. It would eliminate any deadline by which industrial boilers and incinerators must comply with EPA's safeguards. It could mean thousands and thousands of additional pounds of mercury and other toxic pollution released into our air each year. Now, proponents of this legislation are quick to say EPA safeguards to cut this pollution would, and now comes the drum roll, cause economic ruin and job losses. And they point to industry paid-for studies to provide evidence. But indefinitely delaying EPA safeguards will not lead to economic ruin and job losses. What it will do is put the lives and the health of millions of Americans at risk. Failing to implement the EPA's air pollution standards for boilers and incinerators would result, just in 1 year, as many as 6,600 premature deaths, 4,100 non-fatal heart attacks, 4,400 hospital and emergency room visits, 42,000 cases of aggravated asthma, and over 320,000 days of missed work and school. For every additional year of delay that H.R. 2250 allows, these numbers only continue to grow. And we know this because EPA's analysis must follow the criteria set out by the Office of Management and Budget. Their analysis is based on peer-reviewed studies. The analysis is transparent. It's subject to public comment, and it has to be reviewed again by the Office of Management and Budget. The industry studies meet none of these criteria. Mr. Chairman, it is true that EPA already announced it is re-examining aspects of these safeguards. They set out a timeline, providing industry more than enough time and opportunity to weigh in before refinalizing the rules by next April. EPA has said that it does not need nor want additional time for Congress. Delays only hurt America's health. Again, it's worth repeating, hundreds of thousands of jobs are not at risk from these safeguards like some of my colleagues say. EPA's analysis, reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget economists, project that these standards will have a net positive impact on EPA. That's EPA's analysis, reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget. And they will achieve enormous public health benefits that allow Americans to work and go to school and lead healthy lives. For every dollar industry spends to clean up even one industrial boiler or incinerator, Americans get up to $24 back in health benefits. What other investment results in this astonishing return for the American people? And that's why I'm offering this simple amendment today. It would remind us all of the tremendous health benefits that EPA's mercury and air toxics cleanup standards will achieve, and they should be included in this bill. So I urge my colleagues to support this straightforward amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentlelady made a comment that she genuinely questions whether jobs are at risk, and I would simply say that, as I said earlier, we've received over 300 letters, we received phone calls, we received emails, we have 5 major labor unions, national labor unions, supporting this legislation, and the people involved in these businesses are telling us that they are going to have to cut off people from work. They're going to have to terminate people's employment in some instances. And as I said, the University of Notre Dame said they spent $20 million trying to comply with the old rule that was invalidated, and now they're going to have to spend another X millions of dollars to meet these new rules. I would oppose the amendment because basically the gentlelady from California is asking us to put into the findings the Environmental Protection Agency's calculation that for every dollar in cost, the rule will provide at least $10 to $24 in health benefits. Now that alone is kind of interesting. From $10 to $24, that's over a 100% variety there, flexible zone there. It's not very precise. And then she says that it's going to avoid either 2,600 up to 6,600 premature deaths a year, so many non-fatal heart attacks, so many hospital emergency room visits, so many cases of aggravated asthma, so many cases of missed work at school. Well, all of us have said in a lot of these hearings, we've looked at a lot of numbers, and I tell you what, there's no agreement on any of these numbers. There are questions about the assumptions. There are questions about the modeling. There's questions about the lack of transparency. And different groups comes up with different numbers. Yeah, I'd be happy to yield.
To ask if you are aware that these numbers have to be peer-reviewed, so scientists and organizations have evaluated them and made comment, and they also have to be screened by the Office of Budget and Management, OMB, and then they're sent back to EPA. So they've gone through quite a wide variety of verifications. Is that, would you disagree with that fact?
No, I agree that it's been peer-reviewed, and I can also give you a long list of scientists who also have peer reviews that do not agree with these numbers. I can also give you a list of names of people at OMB who question these numbers. I can also give you a list of academics at universities that question these numbers. So,
but they did go through the process.
Oh yeah, they went through the process, and our analysis went through the process too. But the question is, they come up with different numbers, and so therefore, because of that, we don't think it's right to put these particular numbers in there when there's so much disagreement on the numbers. So for that, I would respectfully ask members to oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Please ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been debating this bill, H.R. 2250, for several months now in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And as we've heard from the bill's supporters, the bill is intended to address the Boiler MAC rule that was proposed by EPA in April of 2010 and finalized in February of 2011. Many of us here know that when the Boiler MAC regulation was finalized, EPA asked for 15 months to issue a reproposal. The courts rejected that request, and thus EPA was forced to issue the rule on time in February of 2011. However, EPA immediately instituted an administrative stay on several major rules within the regulation, saying that they would begin reconsideration with new information that had been made available. In the last few months, I've met with many industries and companies that expressed concern with the provisions in this final rule. I've listened and even helped foster ongoing conversations between those industries and EPA as they work toward a reproposal of the Boiler MAC rule. Then we were offered this bill, the EPA Regulatory Relief Act. We were told that this bill would simply give EPA the time that they had already asked for to work on the rule and repropose a new final rule. After the conversations I had had with companies in my district, I thought this would be a good solution. Problem is, when you dig a little deeper, I've said for a long time this EPA Boiler MAC rule is far from perfect. But the trouble is, the bill we have before us today is even further from perfect, because it doesn't just give EPA time to reconsider the rule. It tells EPA they can't issue a new rule for at least 15 months, but there's no deadline for final action. Further, it practically rewrites Sections 112 and 129 of the Clean Air Act by eliminating the need for numeric emission limits for MAC standards. But perhaps the most egregious to me was Section 3 of the bill. It once again rewrites the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act provides for 3 years for compliance with MAC standards, with the possibility of a fourth. Section 3 of this bill tells us to throw that out. It tells us that for the Boiler MAC rule, compliance cannot be required for at least 5 years. However, it then says to the EPA administrator, it gives the administrator the ability to establish compliance dates. So depending on who the administrator is at the time these rules are finalized, compliance could be required in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years, in 105 years. That's just unacceptable, and that's why I'm offering this amendment today. I support many of the things in this bill, and I recognize the need for a reproposal of this rule. But I don't support 5 years to infinity for compliance. And so this amendment will simply require that we go back to the established compliance timelines in the Clean Air Act. It even gives the possibility for an additional year of compliance if a compelling reason is found. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and make this a bill that we can all support when it comes for final passage. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we all have great respect for the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and you could make some very good arguments for his amendment. Basically, he said the amendment would set a 3-year compliance date and allow a case-by-case extension for up to 2 years if the administrator of EPA determined that there was a compelling need. And that's reasonable. But one of the problems that we continue to run into on these Boiler MAC rules, and all the hearings have pointed this out, the fact that lawsuits are always being filed and litigation is continually going on at EPA and consent decrees are being entered into, and it's an ever-changing situation over there on the exact rule. So the one argument that we hear continually from the affected groups is that they need certainty. And even on a case-to-case basis, if the administrator determines a compelling need, we don't have that 100% certainty that we really want. And so our legislation does say that within 15 months they have to come back with promulgation of a new rule, and it does say that the administrator shall establish a date for compliance no earlier than 5 years after the effective date of the regulation. And it does say that the EPA administrator may provide additional time if he or she chooses to do so. Now, just looking at the track record of EPA, I don't suspect that they would be doing that a lot, but they might. But they do have to set a compliance date. We say you must set a compliance date not earlier than 5 years. So even though there are very good arguments on behalf of this amendment, simply because, yes, sir, I'd be happy to.
I would say to my friend, and this is my good friend,
Yeah.
I'm with you all the way right to the very end. The one concern that we have is you say that the compliance date can't be any less than 5 years.
Right.
So you're basically setting, if you would have just said that, compliance shall be at 5 years, that there's a date certain. The problem is your legislation doesn't do any, there's no date certain. It sort of says to the administrator, it can't be sooner than 5 years.
Right. Right.
But it could be as long as you determine that
Right.
you want it to be. It could theoretically be 100 years. I'm not saying it would be 100 years, but
Right.
theoretically
Right.
speaking. And I think what concerns some of us who want to be supportive of this bill,
Right.
because we realize that the proposed rule has flaws and it needs to be reworked. I'm with you on the 15-month rewrite, and we're working with industries right in Pittsburgh with EPA on this as we speak. What concerns many of us is that there's no timeline, there's no end line for compliance in your legislation. You say no less than 5 years, but you never say when is the final deadline. All this amendment asks for is to go back to the Clean Air Act where there's some definition. It's 3 years with the possibility of additional time if the case calls for it. I think if we could get some sort of a finalized deadline on compliance, that you could get a lot of support on this side of the aisle and possibly even pass this bill. As it's written today, it makes it impossible for those of us that are sympathetic to a lot of what is in this bill to be able to support it, and I think it makes it difficult for the President to sign it and for it to pass the Senate. Right. So I would just ask my friend, as we consider this legislation, that we at least give some certainty to the folks who want their air clean, that at some point there's going to be a line that says this is the end date, this is when you comply, not some date in the future that's not defined in the bill. I thank my friend for yielding.
Well, I thank you for your comment, and those are very good thoughts, very good ideas. As you know, a similar bill has been introduced in the Senate. We don't know if it's going to pass or not, but we want to be able to, if it does pass, we want to be able to go into conference with as much flexibility as possible, and that's why we chose a 5-year rule, and a 5-year period instead of a 3-year period, recognizing that there's some uncertainty in both of the 3-year and the 5-year, because under your situation, if there's a compelling need, on a case-by-case basis, they could extend it. In ours, the administrator, under certain circumstances, could extend it. So we do have some Democratic support. We'd love to have your support. If we get into conference, that is one of the parts of this bill that we hope that we can negotiate with the other side and come up with something that's satisfactory for both. So I really appreciate your bringing it to our attention and offering your amendment. And as I said, with as much reluctance as I have, I still will have to oppose it, and hopefully we can work it out in conference if it comes to that. Yes, sir.
I would just say to you, if your bill simply had a 5-year compliance deadline and the Clean Air Act said 3 years with the possibility of an extension, I think you'd have something that many of us would consider, because you'd have a 5-year deadline. You don't have a deadline. That's my problem. You have a no sooner than, but you don't have a deadline.
Okay.
Thanks. I thank my friend.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
For purposes, the gentleman from Virginia rise.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I would have to rise in opposition to the amendment. I agree with many of the comments that were made in regard to everybody trying to be reasonable and work some things out on this. But one of the concerns that I have, and the reason that the language is as it is in the bill, which says that it's 5 years unless there's an extension by the administrator, is that in the real world sense of things, many companies find it difficult to hit the target. And I would hate to see us losing jobs because we had 5 years and 1 month. And under this amendment, if they needed 5 years and 1 month or 5 years and 6 months to comply, then they would not be in compliance, and it may very well cost jobs and cause a company to make a decision that they don't think they can make it. And real-world examples, everything is not perfect, and I've discussed this several times, but one of the factories in my area, the Celanese company, you know, they have to see what the regs look like, then they have to see if they can retool for using coal. If that takes time to figure out whether they can retool their facility to meet the compliance. If they can't meet the compliance, then what about natural gas or some other fuel source? Well, guess what? They don't have a natural gas line coming into the community where they're located that would have enough natural gas in it for any industrial purpose. So as a result of that, they then have to try to figure out how they're going to cross rivers and mountains in order to get natural gas into that community in order to keep those jobs available. And, you know, the problem with this amendment is it is a solid 5 years you're done. And what we're trying to do with the bill overall, while we want to be reasonable and want to try to work something out, we want to also have the EPA administrator in a position that in real-world circumstances, with real-world jobs, not in the ivory towers of the universities necessarily, or even here in the ivory towers of Washington, but out there on the hustings, the real-world jobs have to be taken into account, and sometimes it takes 5 years and 1 month or 5 years and 6 months, and that's why I would urge that we defeat this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I request a roll call vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. Purpose of the gentleman from Kentucky rise.
I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2250, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee upon the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2250 and has come to no resolution thereon.
What purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I offer the resolution previously noticed.
Clerk will report the resolution.
Whereas on October 2nd, 2011, the Washington Post reported a story called Rick Perry and a Word Set on Stone. Whereas upon reading that story, the vast majority of people in the United States were morally outraged. Whereas most of the facts in this resolution come from that Washington Post story. Whereas Governor Rick Perry has described a childhood in Haskell County in Paint Creek, Texas, as centered on Boy Scouts, school, and church. Whereas Texas Governor Rick Perry is from West Texas and was originally a Southern Democrat, often known as Dixiecrats, who switched parties in the late 1980s to become a Republican and is currently a leading Republican presidential candidate. Whereas ranchers who once grazed cattle on the 1,070-acre parcel in Throckmorton County on the Clear Fork of the Brazos River, near where Governor Perry was raised in Paint Creek, Texas, it has since become a hunting ground that was called by the name Niggerhead well before Governor Perry and his father, Ray, began hunting there in the early 1980s, even though there is no definitive account of when the rock first appeared on the property. Whereas the use of the term niggerhead to describe a hunting retreat is morally offensive. Whereas Ronnie Brooks, a local resident who guided a few turkey shoots for Governor Perry between 1985 and 1990, said he holds Governor Perry in the highest esteem, but said this of the rock at the camp. It kind of offended me, truthfully. Whereas Haskell County Judge David Davis, sitting in his courtroom and looking at a window there, said the word was, like those are vertical blinds. It's just what it was called. There was no significance other than a hunting deal. In other words, the judge was morally vacuous. Whereas the name of this particular parcel did not change for years, and for many remained the same after it became associated with Rick Perry, first as a private citizen, then as a state official, and finally as Texas governor. Whereas some local residents still call it by the morally repugnant name Niggerhead. Whereas recently as this summer, the slab-like rock lying flat, portions of the name still faintly visible beneath a coat of white paint, remained by the gated entrance to the camp. Whereas asked last week about the name, Governor Perry said, "The word on the rock is an offensive name that has no place in the modern world," implying that it may have been okay and had an appropriate place in that community when he was growing up. whereas Maylou Yeldel has lived in Haskell County, Texas for 70 years and recalls the racism she faced in the 1950s and 1960s in West Texas when being called an offensive name, like whites greeting blacks with morning nigger, was like a broken record. Whereas Throckmorton County, where the hunting camp is located near Haskell County, was for years considered a virtual no-go zone for African Americans because of old stories told by locals about the lynching of an African American man there. Whereas Haskell County began observing Martin Luther King Jr. Day just 2 years ago, according to a county commissioner in Haskell County. Whereas Governor Perry grew up in a segregated era whose history has defined and complicated the careers of many Southern politicians. Whereas Governor Perry has spoken often about how his upbringing in this sparsely populated farming community influenced his conservatism. Whereas Governor Perry says he mentioned the offensive word on the rock to his parents shortly after they had signed a lease and he had visited the property, and they rather immediately painted over the word during the next July 4th holiday. But 7 people interviewed by the Washington Post said they still saw the word on the rock at various points during the years that the Perry family was associated with the property through his father, partners, or his signature on a lease. Whereas another local resident who visited the property with Governor Perry and the legislators he brought there to go hunting recalled seeing the rock with the name clearly visible. Whereas how, when, or whether Governor Perry dealt with it when he was using the property isn't clear, and adds a dimension to the emerging biography of Governor Perry, who quickly moved into the top tier of Republican presidential candidates when he entered the race in August. And whereas Herman Cain is the only Republican presidential candidate to criticize Governor Rick Perry for being insensitive when the word was not immediately condemned. But we would remind Herman Cain that the word is not only insensitive, but it is also offensive. Now therefore be it resolved that the House of Representatives, 1, calls on Governor Rick Perry to apologize for not immediately doing away with the rock that contained the word niggerhead at the entrance of a ranch he was leasing and on which he was taking friends, colleagues, and supporters to hunt. 2, calls on Governor Rick Perry's presidential rivals who have not yet to make strong statements of outrage over the rock that contained the word to do so. 3, calls upon Governor Rick Perry to condemn the use of this word as being totally offensive and inappropriate at any time and any place in United States history. And 4, calls upon Governor Rick Perry to list the names of all lawmakers, friends, and financial supporters he took with him on his hunting trips at Niggerhead.
Does the gentleman from Illinois wish to present argument on why the resolution is privileged under Rule 9 to take precedence over other questions?
Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, just before you do rule,
Gentleman's recognized.
the House of Representatives does have a history of passing resolutions that have been privileged in the past on questions that are offensive and morally repugnant to many Americans. There was a minister on the south side of Chicago, for example, for which this House took up a particular resolution and denounced that minister for language that he used on numerous occasions against minorities in the United States. And consistent with the language of this resolution that I have offered, the House has taken a position in the past that allows members of Congress to express their conscience and their sentiments about the matters that are in front of us. Now, as a member of Congress and a member of this institution, my final argument is that each one of these presidential candidates, whether they're on the Democratic side or on the Republican side, stand the chance to stand in front of us and provide us with a State of the Union address, a state of our country's fiscal health, its social health, its mental health, its physical health, and protect us from enemies both foreign and domestic. If my motion for someone that might stand in front of me as a member of Congress and share with me their vision, potentially, of the United States fails today, it simply suggests that the Congress of the United States is painting over a profound problem that exists in this nation. And I personally, Mr. Speaker, I know that my time has expired for making my argument. I personally would be offended that the Congress of the United States would not understand the gravity of this resolution by granting members an opportunity to vote on the specific arguments laid out by the Washington Post for which they've offered their story. Mr. Speaker, nigger is offensive. Nigger head is offensive. And for a governor of one of the great states of our nation to hunt at Niggerhead Ranch, it's offensive. And I think that I'm expressing the moral outrage of all Americans, and I thank the gentleman for allowing me to make my argument.
The chair is prepared to rule. The resolution offered by the gentleman from Illinois makes several assertions about the governor of a state and proposes that the House call upon that governor and others to take certain actions with regard to these assertions. In order to qualify as a question of the privileges of the House under Rule 9, the resolution must address, quote, the rights of the House collectively, its safety, dignity, or the integrity of its proceedings, end quote. The resolution seeks to express the position of the House toward the actions of others outside of the House without any tangible connection to the House or its proceedings. A resolution merely asserting the position of the House with regard to an external issue cannot be used as the basis of a question of privilege. As articulated by the Chair most recently on September 23, 2010, according privilege to such a resolution would allow any member to place before the House at any time whatever topic he or she might deem advisable. In such an environment, anything could be privileged, so nothing would enjoy true privilege. The Chair finds, therefore, that the resolution does not affect, quote, the rights of the House collectively, its safety, dignity, or the integrity of its proceedings, end quote, within the meaning of Clause 1 of Rule 9, and therefore does not qualify as a question of the privileges of the House.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Sir, with all due respect, I appeal the ruling of the Chair, and I would hope that my colleagues would support my appeal.
The question is, shall the decision of the Chair stand as the judgment of the House? Members of the gentleman from Kentucky rise.
Mr. Speaker, I move to table the gentleman's motion to appeal the ruling of the Chair.
Question is on the motion to lay the appeal on the table. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, nay. Chair rules that the ayes have it, and the motion passes.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Illinois.
I'd like to call the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House is voting on tabling an appeal by Jesse Jackson. He had brought up earlier today a resolution that demanded an apology from Texas Governor Rick Perry. And this is based on the hunting camp, the Texas Ranch, near where Governor Perry used to live, and a rock bearing the name of a term offensive to African Americans and many others. And the House had Jesse Jackson had made that and introduced the resolution earlier in the debate, and here the chair had ruled that it did not qualify as a question of privilege of the House, and the House is now voting a procedural vote here on taking up the resolution. The House today had passed earlier a bill that would prevent the EPA from implementing rules on cement plant emissions, and then moved on to debate on amendments to a similar bill, one that would deal with the EPA rules on industrial boilers and incinerators, and we expect that they will resume debate on that once this vote is over. The House in the first of a number of votes here. Earlier today, Illinois Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. brought forth a resolution asking for an apology from Texas Governor Rick Perry for an offensive term of a hunting camp near where he used to live. The resolution came back to the floor. The chair ruled that it did not rise to the level of a question of privileges and a vote here on the House. This is the first in a series of 5 or 6 votes. It's a 15-minute vote on the House floor and a number of amendment votes coming up considering the bill on the EPA regulations of heaters and also industrial boilers. On the Senate side, the Senate today continuing work on the China currency bill. They agreed to invoke cloture to limit debate on the bill. That passed by a vote of 62 to 38. Alexander Bolton, who is covering that debate in the U.S. Senate, writes for The Hill and joins us on the phone. Tie that debate on the China currency bill into the push by the president to get his jobs bill considered.
Well, Republicans, led by Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, are pushing to have a vote on the president's jobs bill as an amendment to the China currency legislation. Obama has been barnstorming the country, urging Congress to vote on his package to pass it immediately. When he delivered his address to a joint session of Congress at the beginning of last month, he repeatedly said, "Pass this bill right away." Well, Republicans are taking him up on the offer, and they're looking to have a vote immediately on this bill. It's not because they like it, it's because they want to embarrass the president. And they know that a number of Democrats don't like the proposal Obama put together because of the ways it would raise money to pay for the $447 billion in stimulus. It would limit deductions for families that earn over $250,000. It would eliminate tax breaks for oil and gas companies. And these proposals have sparked pushback, strong pushback from the Democratic caucus. So the Republican calculation is if they can force a vote on Obama's jobs package right away during this debate on the China currency bill, that it will lose by a large margin. Many Democrats will vote against it, and it will be politically embarrassing to the president. Republicans will then make will be able to make the argument, this bill is going nowhere. It's a bad proposal. See, even members of the president's own party don't support it.
In terms of paying for the bill, didn't the landscape change a bit, though, yesterday with Harry Reid's proposal?
That's right. Harry Reid he scrapped the president's pay-fors. He has his own pay-fors, and the entire cost of the bill would be covered by a 5.6% surtax on income over $1 million. So, the Democrats are modifying it, but that's not what McConnell will be forcing a vote on. He wants to force a vote on the president's original plan. Now, what Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, said today on the floor is, well, that's not actually the president's jobs plan. If you want to have a vote on that, that's fine. That's not the president's jobs plan. The Democrats are making the argument that the president's jobs plan is what they just unveiled yesterday, which is with this millionaire's surtax as a pay-for. And so, and the other thing the Democrats note is that from the start, Obama was flexible about how this jobs package should be paid for. He suggested limiting deductions, but he said to Democratic leaders, you can do what you want. And he is on board with the millionaire surtax. So that's the Democratic counterargument.
In the end, what version will pass the Senate, do you think?
I bet neither version passes the Senate. But the first version of the Obama jobs bill that would eliminate the oil and gas subsidies and limit deductions, that's going to go down by a large margin. It remains to be seen what the Democratic strategy will be. Republicans tried a similar maneuver earlier this year when they forced a vote on President Obama's fiscal year 2012 budget blueprint. At that point, the president had already given a speech where he laid out a new vision of deficit reduction. And when the vote was forced on the Senate floor, all Democrats voted against it. It went down 97-0. So it remains to be seen what do the Democrats do now. If McConnell forces a vote on this jobs package, which is now out of date, will Democrats vote like they did against the budget en masse against it? Who knows? Right now, whether there will, well, right now it's unclear whether there will be a vote or not on this jobs package. Reid seemed to say today that he would allow a vote as an amendment, but now Democratic leadership aides are saying, well, they won't allow a vote on the actual package itself. Instead, they'll allow a vote on a motion to suspend the rules to then proceed to the package, which is slightly different.
An update from the U.S. Senate from Alexander Bolton, who writes for The Hill, and you can read his reporting at thehill.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Back live on the House floor. This is the first in a series of votes. This first one is a procedural vote on a resolution that was brought up earlier by Illinois Representative Jesse Jackson, Jr., which, among other things, calls on Governor Rick Perry to apologize for a phrase, a word that was associated with an offensive word with the Texas hunting camp near where he used to live. This is a 15-minute vote on the House floor. Back to the issue of jobs. John Boehner was part of an ideas forum today in Washington and took part in a conversation with Major Garrett of National Journal. And Major Garrett, among his first questions, asked the Speaker what he would ask the President during his news conference today. And here was the Speaker's reply.
Mr. Speaker, welcome. By happy coincidence, the President of the United States is going to have a press conference in about 10 minutes. And as you know, sir, I have some vague familiarity with the cable news industry, so I'm going to give you an opportunity you don't often have, which is to look into those cameras and ask the President of the United States a question, which might be translated at the press conference 10 minutes hence.
Well, Mr. President, why have you given up on the country and decided to campaign full-time instead of doing what the American people sent us all here to do, and that's to find common ground to deal with the big challenges that face our economy and our country?
There you go. Cable news, have at it. Mr. Speaker.
What a great way to get started.
Mr. Speaker, the Vice President was just on this stage, and a moment ago he said roughly the following: that there was a rough agreement between yourself, Eric Cantor, the Vice President, and the President on the debt ceiling. But for the inability of either you or Mr. Cantor to control your rank-and-file House Republicans, that deal would have gone through. And he implied that the Republican Party is divided and weak, and that's what's holding the country back and prevented that deal. Would you like to address that assessment from the Vice President?
I sure would.
I thought you might.
You know, all year I talked to the President about the need to do what I called the big deal. That I thought it was critically important for our country to deal with the debt problem that we had, and that the best way to get there would have been for he and I to come to some agreement. I can tell you that I put every ounce of effort that I can and could into trying to come to some agreement. The President said that he needed revenues. I told the President that I was willing, I'd be willing to do revenues, but only if the President were willing to really look at fundamental reform of our entitlement programs, which is a big driver of our deficit and our debt. And so I put revenues on the table, even though the President never said, not one time, ever said yes to any meaningful reform of our entitlement programs. When the President called me and asked for $400 billion of more revenue, before he ever agreed to any changes in the entitlement programs, is when I decided we were never going to get there. I could never get the President to the point where he would say yes to real changes in our entitlement programs. I have myself out as far on a limb as I could possibly walk, trying to come to some agreement. But it takes two to tango, and the President would never say yes.
Speaker John Boehner from earlier today at the Aspen Ideas Forum, and you'll see all of that later in our program schedule. You can also see it in our video library at cspan.org. On the House floor, a series of 6 votes, 5 of which will be amendments to a bill that delays EPA regulation of air emissions from industrial boilers and incinerators. 5 amendment votes. This first vote, though, is a procedural vote dealing with a resolution from Representative Jesse Jackson of Illinois, a resolution that called on Texas Governor Rick Perry to apologize for not immediately doing away with a rock that contained an offensive word at the entrance of a ranch in Texas he was leasing, and to which he was taking friends and supporters to hunt. This is a 15-minute vote, but still, as you can see on your screen, plenty left to cast their vote. So we're going to bring you some of the comments this morning from President Obama's news conference, where he was asked about the Chinese currency bill that's currently on the Senate floor.
Now, with respect to working with Congress, I think it's fair to say that I have gone out of my way in every instance, sometimes at my own political peril and to the frustration of Democrats, to work with Republicans to find common ground to move this country forward. In every instance, whether it was during the lame duck session, when we were able to get an agreement on making sure that the payroll tax was cut in the first place and making sure that unemployment insurance was extended, to my constant efforts during the debt ceiling to try to get what's been called a grand bargain, in which we had a balanced approach to actually bringing down our deficit and debt in a way that wouldn't hurt our recovery. Each time, what we've seen is games playing, a preference to try to score political points rather than actually get something done on the part of the other side. And that has been true not just over the last 6 months, that's been true over the last 2.5 years. Now, the bottom line is this. Our doors are open. And what I've done over the last several weeks is to take the case to the American people so that they understand what's at stake. It is now up to all the senators and hopefully all the members of the House to explain to their constituencies why they would be opposed to common sense ideas that historically have been supported by Democrats and Republicans in the past. Why would you be opposed to tax cuts for small businesses and tax cuts for American workers? My understanding is that for the last decade, they've been saying we need to lower taxes for folks. Well, why wouldn't we want to do that through this jobs bill? We know that we've got roads and bridges and schools that need to be rebuilt. And historically, Republicans haven't been opposed to rebuilding roads and bridges. Why would you be opposed now? We know that the biggest problem that we've had in terms of unemployment over the last several months has not been in the private sector. It's actually been layoffs of teachers and cops and firefighters. We've created over 2 million jobs in the private sector, 1 million jobs this year alone in the private sector, but in the public sector, we keep on seeing these layoffs having an adverse effect on economies in states all across the country. Why wouldn't we want to make sure that those teachers are in the classroom teaching our kids? So here's the bottom line. My expectation and hope is that everybody will vote for this jobs bill because it reflects those ideas that traditionally have been supported by both Democrats and Republicans. If it turns out that there are Republicans who are opposed to this bill, they need to explain to me, but more importantly to their constituencies and the American people, why they're opposed and what would they do. We know that this jobs bill, based on independent analysis, could grow the economy almost an additional 2%. That could mean an additional 1.9 million jobs. Do they have a plan that would have a similar impact? Because if they do, I'm happy to hear it. But I haven't heard them offer alternatives that would have that same kind of impact, and that's what we need right now. A lot of the problems that this economy is facing are problems that predate the financial crisis. Middle-class families seeing their wages and their incomes flat despite rising costs for everything from health care to a college education. And so folks have been struggling, not just for the last 3 years, they've been struggling for over a decade now. And at a time when so many people are having such a hard time, we have to have an approach, we have to take action that is big enough to meet the moment. And what I've heard from Republicans is, well, we're agreeing to do these trade bills. That's great. I'm in favor of those trade bills, and I'm glad they're passing. But that's not going to do enough to deal with the huge problems we have right now with respect to unemployment. You know, we passed patent legislation. That was bipartisan work. I'm thrilled that we were able to get Republicans and Democrats to work together on that. But that is a long-term issue for our economic competitiveness. It's not putting Americans to work right now. So the bottom line is this, Ben. If next week senators have additional ideas that will put people back to work right now and meet the challenges of the current economy, we are happy to consider them. But every idea that we put forward are ones that traditionally have been supported by Democrats and Republicans alike. And I think it's important for us to have a vote on those ideas because I believe that it's very hard to argue against them. And if Mr. McConnell chooses to vote against it, or if members of his caucus choose to vote against it, I promise you we're going to keep on going, and we will put forward maybe piece by piece each component of the bill. And each time they're going to have to explain why it is that they'd be opposed to putting teachers back in the classroom or rebuilding our schools or giving tax cuts to middle-class folks and giving tax cuts to small businesses.
Do you think the recovery is close to faltering?
I think that if we don't take action, then we could end up having more significant problems than we have right now. And some of it's just simple math. The payroll tax cut that we passed is set to expire. The jobs plan includes an extension of the payroll tax cut. Now, if that is not extended, then that is over $1,000 out of the pockets of the average American family at a time when they're already feeling a severe pinch. That means they're going to be spending less. That means businesses are going to have less customers, and that's going to have an adverse effect on an economy that is already weaker than it should be.
On the U.S. House floor, a procedural vote on a resolution brought up by by Illinois Representative Jesse Jackson dealing with Texas Governor Rick Perry. It calls for Governor Perry to apologize for not immediately doing away with an offensive term that had been painted on a rock near the entrance of a ranch which he was using and leasing in Texas. The resolution brought up again by Jesse Jackson, Jr. of Illinois. The chair had ruled that it didn't rise to the question of privileges of the House. Representative Jackson appealed that ruling, and the Republicans sought to table the appeal, and that is the vote on the House floor. There will be, after this, 5 amendment votes on a bill that deals with allowing the EPA, blocking, the EPA from implementing new regulations dealing with industrial boilers and also incinerators in terms of emissions of toxic air pollutants. 5 amendment votes will follow this procedural vote on the resolution on the House floor. In the Senate, they continue debate on the Chinese currency bill after voting cloture, voting to limit debate on that bill earlier today. That passed by a vote of 62 to 38. You can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2.
The yeas are 231, the nays are 173. Motion is agreed to without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Out or just ahead? to the microphone. Pursuant to House Resolution 419 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2250. Will the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Yoder, kindly resume the chair?